May 12th meeting of the Lane County Budget Committee to order. And I see members present with the exception of Don Leslie actually wrote earlier and said she wasn't going to be able to make it to this meeting. Chris Hazen's been out sick for a little bit and we have not heard an update from him. So all other members are present. So next item on the agenda is committee business. Did we have a set of minutes? So you did not come.
We don't have another set yet. Oh, but you
did we have a set for approval?
We did send 5-3 out to everyone, so you could approve those.
Did people get an opportunity to read that set of minutes?
I thought we were doing them all. Did I misunderstand? We were just going to.
I know that I have not, and so therefore I think we will hold those for the next meeting. So please make a note to review the previous minutes, and we will deal with them at the next session. Christine, anything else for the committee?
Nothing else.
Okay. Anything else from committee members?
Oh, hey, he's here.
Oh, there's Chris. Sorry. We'll give a second here.
Yeah.
Looks healthy.
Yeah.
Okay, so rather than waiting for the teacher to call on us and say if we have something to tell the class, I'm getting over COVID, and I'm pretty much asymptomatic at this point. But I just want everybody to be comfortable with where I sit in the room. I'm wearing the KN95. So, everybody okay with that, or you want me to sit over in the corner someplace? Or?
How many days since your positive test?
So I'm still testing positive this morning.
Oh, we don't. That's not good.
So yeah, whatever people are comfortable with. So I've had first positive test was last Wednesday.
Yeah, if you're still testing positive, you should be isolating for 5 days since your most recent positive test.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And masking for 10 after.
Yeah. So I've got questions that I will relay by email. So I'm reviewing asynchronously, and we'll share questions later. So for sure.
Are we set up for hybrid? Can you go home and log in and join us? Bruce did that Tuesday, and it worked really great.
Yeah, they worked real well. Okay.
That's excellent. Yes, and send in your questions, please.
Yeah.
And if you haven't had a chance to review the past meetings as well.
Okay.
Very good.
No, that's all
Yeah.
right.
And take care. Stay hydrated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go home and hydrate.
Okay.
I'm positive. Are you okay with that? Yeah.
Moving forward, any other committee business? Seeing none, let's go forward. Chris, welcome. Chris, Mike.
I'm Chris.
Too many Chris's.
Single syllable name.
I looked right at Mike. Thank you, Mike, for if you want to go ahead with your presentation, that'd be great.
Today we have myself and Mary Schaefer, and we your last name on it, sorry.
Okay.
And so we're giving a dual presentation today. Mary is our new deputy assessor for the last 3 months.
Yeah, feels like
months or so.
4 years, but yeah.
So she's going to start out the presentation, then I'll follow up at the end.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm new to this. I know a lot of you have probably heard the message from assessment taxation, so just work with me while I sort of get in my rhythm here. So I'm going to go over the key information. Next slide, please. As many of you know, the assessment date for assessment taxation is January 1st of 2022 for the fiscal year 22-23. The assessment roll uses the previous year's sales. So we're going to be looking at analyzing sales from the 2021 tax year. 2021 calendar year, excuse me. Property value analysis is recalculation and trending. And the property tax year begins July 1st, 2022 and goes to June 30th of 2023. And November 15th of 2022 is our first trimester property tax due. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about interest rates. You know, rates were low in 2021, and most experts expected mortgage rates to rise this year, but what we saw is an increase that far exceeded expectations so far. As of May 4th, the current average rate was 5.73% for a 30-year fixed mortgage. And as of May 10th, the average rate was 5.91%. Yeah, so next slide, please. Inflation, this talks about inflation, and the consumer price index is the graph. So inflation is rising. It's risen 8.5% for the 12 months ending in March, which is the largest 12-month increase since the period ending in December of 1981. The energy index rose 32% over the last year, and the food index rose 8.8%, which if anyone has a teenager, you know that felt more like 50%.
Well, I remember that period entering in May 1981 too.
Yeah,
That was great.
yeah. And then you can see that the consumer price index from March 21 to March of 2022 doubled. So it's at 1.2%. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about unemployment, and specifically in Lane County. Lane County payroll employment increased a seasonally adjusted 1,100 jobs in March, after an increase of 200 in February and an increase prior to that of 1,100 in January. The county has regained 71% of the jobs lost in March and April of 2020 at the onset of COVID-19. When comparing March 2022 with March 2021, the total non-farm employment is up 5,900 jobs, or 3.9%. So, you know, what this looks like for us in our department is, you know, it's a tight job market. Our staff is leaving to find employment that better suits their needs, and also we're gaining, you know, staff that that we are an opportunity for other employees. So yeah, now we just have to hang on to those people and fill the open positions that we have, which, as all of you know, that can be challenging right now.
So the net difference on those two is, where's your status right now with employees?
I think in PTM, we have
We've lost 6 people since the beginning of the year. We've recovered 3 of those positions. We're getting some temporary help from the Department of Revenue. And then in appraisal, we have lost 3 positions. We have some internal movement also, so that, you know, kind of have to rob Peter to pay Paul a little bit. And I think we have 2 positions open in appraisal right now. Our commercial appraisal is finally fully staffed, which is good. So
yeah, an area that we're also hiring for right now is photography positions. So
yeah, we have 2 of those open.
We have 2 open right now.
Yeah,
and that's where we're reaching out to the Department of Revenue to help us out as far as to make sure we complete the tax return this year.
And that's a great question. Next slide, please, because it segues into Lane County housing starts and what that translates to for our workload. So the first part of this graph, you'll see that 2021 was a strong year for new housing permitted in Lane County. Housing permits, particularly multifamily starts, are on the rise at 57% of this total 1,930 starts. So what this signals is a collective shift with our resources and attitudes towards solving the housing crisis problem we are in. And an increase in permits is an increase in our workload in both divisions of property tax management and appraisal. It means that we have more tax accounts. We have, you know, that many more permits to inspect. And I started with assessment taxation at the end of 2005. And the following fiscal year, we had 61 FTE and 728,000 tax accounts. Currently, we have 50 FTE, or excuse me, 49.5 FTE, and I can explain the 0.5 if anybody's curious. And that we have a total of 180,926 tax accounts. So, you know, you understand, we haven't recovered all the positions we lost a decade ago. So we've recovered 2. Yeah.
On your chart, it says 2021, 1,930 units. And you said, and it might just be semantic, 1,930 starts. So am I correct in that the multifamily, that's one tax, right? If I have a building with 40 units, that's one tax.
That's correct.
And are 57% of all the units approved multifamily units?
That's a great question. So 57%. So look at that 1,930 as one permit per project. So it's not per unit within a multifamily structure. It's one permit per.
So there's
property
1,930 projects.
Yes.
And 57% of the units or of the projects?
Projects.
Projects.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes. And if you look back at 2005, there was 2,261 permits pulled or projects, if you will. And that's just over 33% multifamily. So you can see kind of a shift in resources and yeah.
If I could real quick to
Yes,
draw
please.
a connection between that and what you were talking about with staffing and appraisers.
Yes, sir.
Specifically. So when a new project or new gets developed and finished,
Yes.
is that appraisal done by a residential appraiser or a commercial appraiser for multifamily?
Multifamily is generally commercial.
Okay.
Duplexes, residential appraisers look at,
Yeah,
and
just the-
triplexes.
The 5 units and above typically are the commercial side, and 4 units below are more residential.
Yeah.
And you said you were fully staffed on the currently fully staffed on the commercial appraisers.
Mhm. Yes, we did shift resources and reclassified a commercial appraiser to the cartography because we had to balance the need there. Instead of having 2 people in the cartography positions, we need 3 because we now know we lost a carto position, and that really put a heavy strain on that position.
Can you explain? Can you define that for me? Cartographer.
Yes, so our cartography positions, and Mike jump in anytime, they're the specialists who, say for example, there's a subdivision that's platted. It's our cartographers that go in and map that and update all of the information on the dirt, right?
Okay.
And how it translates to the tax maps. And then our specialist positions go in and they assign the account numbers and, you know, the ownership records, and so.
So anytime there's a lot line adjustment, partition, subdivision, re-recording of a deed, that has a lot legal description change, our cartographers have to make those changes to our base fabric. And we had 3 cartographers, boy, it was 10 years ago or so. And as we're trying to be agile and change our resources as we need them, we reclassified one of the photography positions to a appraiser position that we're changing back.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes,
Chris.
57% I'm assuming is countywide.
that's right.
As you begin to then look at the jurisdictions within the county, is there a significant variation? I would assume a lot of that multifamily is happening in Eugene, Springfield, Cottage Grove. Is there a large degree of differentiation between the different communities, or is it actually surprisingly consistent?
I think it's mostly consistent with the Eugene, Springfield area.
Okay.
Eugene, especially student housing is incredible. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
You drive down Broadway, Ferry Street in that area out there. The high-rise student housing is quite impressive. What's being built.
So if you were to look at, say, Eugene, you might say the percentage is more closer to 60, 62, 63% just in Eugene.
I would assume that. I don't know for a fact, but I would assume that'd be correct.
Yeah, because I remember when they did their metro plan, they were working with a 60-40 split, single family favored. And they said, well, let's be bold and go to 55, 35. Looks like that wasn't bold at all. It was actually an underestimate.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr, you had a question?
Just a quick question, the tax impact on student housing.
Student housing really depends as far as if there's a MUPD,
Yeah.
multifamily housing exemption. Up to 10 years, we wouldn't receive the property taxes for the improvements, new improvements being built. But we would receive property tax dollars for the existing structures if it's a renovation or the land value and site development. It is one of those programs that's kind of controversial sometimes as far as for the monthly progress, but I think it does the job that it's supposed to do as far as encourages the development of housing, which we really dearly need in the county.
Yeah.
And it meets the letter of the law. It is predominantly student housing, but it is generally taxable at a level.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
fully,
Yeah.
fully taxable. That's
Yeah.
That's the year they probably do it.
Or sell it.
So-
Or sell it.
Okay.
Next slide,
Or
please.
so-
So,
Oh,
this is inventory and market time. And this is, the market time and the inventory are both low. As you all know, this is 2021 was a hot market. When there was a house on the market or a property on the market, there was multiple offers, sellers saw escalation clauses, you heard stories, right? Like, oh, somebody got 60,000 over asking, or so on and so forth. So the market time was 23 days and the inventory was less than or equal to 1 month over the entire year. So now I'm going to pass it to Assessor Close.
thank you.
Yes.
I'll just, on the slide here, it has the 2021 in the red line, 2020 in the green line. You can see that in the blue line, 2019. You can see the inventory declining over the years. It's quite significant as far as the decline. And looking at the market action for April 2022 that just came out, I believe 2 days ago, we're looking at inventory still at 0.7 months. And so that's a major seller's market as far as everyone knows. As I mentioned earlier, just driving around, you see such low number of for sale signs, and with the inventory being so low, as Mary indicated, the marketing time, it's down to 23 days. Essentially, when a property is priced right, goes in the market, it will sell very quickly, usually over ask. And the whole year last year was under 1 month in inventory, which I haven't seen that for a very long time. Go ahead and go to the next slide. One of the indications as far as the market activity and how the market's doing is foreclosures. Foreclosures are at 0.12% or 0.11%, I'm sorry. And that does not include short sales or some of the LUAs that are not indicated on the recordings. But that's a very low amount of foreclosures. As you can tell by the historical time, 2007, 2010, we had a peak of foreclosures. And then right now we're at record lows as far as foreclosures. I suspect that'll stay low for at least a couple more years. The market's at an interesting point right now. I'll go through that a little bit more in a few minutes.
People were buying $600,000.
Moving from next slide. Moving from the residential side to a little bit on the commercial, industrial, multifamily side. The lines that are shown on the graph here, we have the vacancy rate for commercial, and these are small cap commercial non-portfolio properties, is declined pretty significantly. And that's kind of, for me, it's kind of a little unexpected. You can see the vacancy rate popped up a little bit, it dropped down after COVID. Well, we're still in COVID. And then the price index, as far as it shows the general price index for small cap commercial real estate, shows a general increase in values over this past year, 2 years, as far as you can see. And actually, some of the information I looked at showed, instead of generals, that substantial increase. I haven't yet seen the substantial increase, but I've seen a general increase in values for small caps. We're currently analyzing the sales for 2021 for the 2022 ratio study. So we'll have more information in the next month or so as far as value changes. Generally, we're seeing as far as for other properties, multifamily, it's very strong, a very strong market. Industrial, we haven't finished our analyzing for those, and a large cap commercial. The only ones we're really taking a close look at are some of the malls and some of the larger office space, as far as depending on what happens with the marketplace for those. The malls have really had a lot of downward pressure nationwide, and we have our two regional main malls in Lane County, and we are seeing a little bit of downward pressure on those malls.
I'm curious too, as a sector, banks, I've been hearing a lot about, banking moving away from brick and mortar, and in terms of, smaller properties, but huge number.
That's correct.
In every part of the county.
Yes, smaller footprints for the operations, and more utilization of the tools that we've gained the last 2 years, and more moving online as far as more than was previously. Go ahead to the next slide. So back to residential, the average and median sale price. This is a piece that is really interesting as far as so we're always looking at December RMLS as far as so we're looking at December of 2021, and the average sales price, which is skewed a little bit because average includes the higher value properties. The median more takes the midpoint of the properties. So December 21, the average sales price for a residential property was $435,300 for Lane County. Comparing 2021 2020, it's up 19.1%, which is significant. The median sales price is a little better indicator, which is under $400,000 for single family dwelling, and that's up 18.6% comparing 2021 2020. Just looking at January through March of 2022, we're still seeing upward pressure, where the average sales price was at $462,800 in March, and up 6.3% just this year. And the median sale price at $425, up 6.5% for this year. And just pulling information from yesterday's or the day before yesterday's RMLS release, we're still seeing an increase. Or in April, we're seeing an average at $469 and a median at $427. So we're still seeing that increase, maybe a little bit slower. If you read the Register Guard, it was yesterday, the Realtor.com and the Register Guard reported through USA Today, believe a slight decrease in values in residential. So there's some mixed messaging a little bit I've seen out there in the media for this past month. And so maybe it's a little bit of slowing from the interest rates jumping up to that par 6%, somewhere in that range, which is expected. So we'll see what happens in the next few months as far as the market as it adjusts to the interest rates, and see what happens with that. The slide here, as far as the red, is the median. It usually always follows a few ticks below the average median, the average sale price. And look at the next slide. This is just another indicator that we use as far as standing main home price index. And you can see the year-over-year change is right here. See the increase, record growth in the first quarter of this year. And then here's the actual change in the whole home price index. You can see it just shoot right up as far as the first quarter of 2022. And that's just another indication as far as from our local sales information versus the national indexes. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So considerations on property tax revenue. What does this all mean as far as the inflation and interest rates? And we're lucky in Oregon with measure 47 and 50. I say that kind of lucky for is that it makes projecting tax revenue easier because with the measure 47 and 50 that were passed back in the mid-90s, late 90s, we typically see the 3% increase in the maximum assessed value, which usually equates to a 3% increase in the taxable value for properties. So that's the biggest increase as far as that we see per year. Usually we budget around 3.25 to 4.25 that range. It depends on the market study. For overall property tax increase, I have some charts in a little bit I'll show you on those projections. But that 3% is a big deal. The difference between that additional percentage when we go to that 3.25% to 4.25% is the new construction, other exception value. As we talked about, the new houses being built, apartments being built, they're at a new tax roll. Measure 5 constraints are still out there. So the constraints were passed back in 1990 for 91, 92 were the $5 in education, $10 for government are still constraints that we have to work with. Appeals and roll corrections. Appeals actually were at a record low this past year. For VACTA, we saw 150
total
appeals. We used to have 1,000 appeals, a couple thousand. I think the first year I started back in 91, when we have measured 5 pass, we went up to 4,000 or 5,000 appeals to work through. So that does help us out through our workload as far as when we're focusing on appeals versus focusing on revaluation of properties.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think it's just a strong market.
Everybody
Such a strong market.
they get the value and say, well, I think it's worth more than that.
And it probably is because we're looking at January 1st assessment date and the prior year sales. So by the time someone gets their property tax statement in November, we're about, could be up to a year and a half behind in the sales that are used for that.
Yeah.
And so that helps us out staffing. That could change as the market changes, and that's a big indicator.
Well, that makes sense. I just
Admitted property or clear layers obviously have an impact to the property tax roll.
is it going down?
Flipped accounts. Flipped accounts is something we're not really seeing much right now. Back when the market crashed, we saw people being taxed on the real market value versus their maximum assessed value. And that, under the rules of 47 and 50, that becomes their assessed value, not getting too much of the weeds of things. But back in the recession, we saw flipped accounts up to about 26% of accounts in Lane County were actually paying on the real market value. That's when you see that 3% actually not materialize. You see that 3% actually maybe be a negative number or less than 3%. As I indicated previously, residential markets are very robust. We're currently analyzing the commercial, industrial, multifamily markets. We are going to start reappraisal, or as we have been year after year, minor pockets of hotspot work. And so this year we're being really ambitious. We have a product called Mobile Assessor, which allows our appraisers to be in the field with tablets versus paper and pen, paper and pencil. And so we're hoping for be able to do much more reappraisal work using those tools and be more modern with our workforce and more careful stewardship of the tax dollars that we do use for our department. Exemptions, they come in and out each year. As we talked about the monthly exemptions, there's 100 some odd property tax exemptions are on the books, and we have to administer those exemptions along with the Department of Revenue. New laws, administrative rules. New laws, every year we get changes to our property tax rules. And for example, House Bill 3143 that passed this prior year for property taxpayers, the interest date for this upcoming property tax year, they'll receive the statement in late October. Typically the due date is November 15th. However, the laws change this currently year where the due date's still November 15th, the discount's still November 15th, but the interest date's now December 15th. So they always throw little loops like that for us as far as things changes to our software, changes to our processes. So that'll be a change some year. And that's just a result of people being 1 or 2 days late and getting that 1 month interest charge. The way it's calculated now, they'll have a little grace period there for the interest. They'll still lose a little discount, but they'll have a little grace period for interest. And training, depreciation, and recalculation. For our county and state accounts, we usually use a training and depreciation method if we haven't reappraised those properties. And Marshall and Smith is one of our main indicators of values. And they have had a significant increase in their trending factors. So we might see an increase, we probably will see an increase in some of our large county industrial account values and probably some of the state industrial account values, just with the cost of goods. That relates back to the inflation and everything else that's going on in the market and economy.
Mike, before you leave,
Yes, sir.
dumb questions. I buy $1 million house that just got built. My property tax will be based on that $1 million, correct?
It's based on a model.
On a model.
On a model using that $1 million or previous sales. And
There would
so,
be no previous sales.
and so if there's no previous sales, look at previous sales of like properties in the same area. If there's no previous sales of like properties in a similar area, we'll expand that out further and further.
But I'll pay more property. I'll pay more taxes than if I bought, I'm asking, I don't know, $1 million property that's 20 years old and was last sold for $200,000.
So the way that the values work as far as for existing property, we take the 95 value if it's an older existing property minus 10%, and that increases typically 3% per year. And so when a new property goes in the tax roll, say $1 million property, it's going to go through what's called a change property ratio that we calculate each year. And typically that ratio is around between 50 and 70%, somewhere in there, depending on the property class. And so $1 million property, if the ratio is at 60%, your assessed value the first year, or your maximum assessed value would be $600,000. And the equities that exist in our tax system are back for the existing property could be at 500,000, could be at 400,000. It really depends what the value was back in 1995.
Right. And so where this is leading, I think, is all of the new starts for new properties means significant income.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And every new house adds new value to the tax roll. Going to the next slide. This is one that I always like to throw in. It's an interesting slide, especially when you get into policy issues and things like that, as far as just to see who our top taxpayers are in Lane County. And if you notice, International Paper is one of our top, it is our top taxpayer in Lane County. CenturyLink, otherwise known as Luma Technologies, is our second largest taxpayer. Verizon and Northwest Natural is the fourth. So just as you're, it's a personal commentary for me, as you're looking at policy, please realize that, for example, Northwest Natural, as we look at electrifying and looking at natural gas, they're our fourth largest taxpayer. And so just please keep that in mind as you look at policy. Going to the next slide. This slide just shows me playing around with the charts and everything else. We're looking at the taxable value for Lane County. This is the entire taxable value for all property. And this is bringing from 2009, 2025, forecasting forward to 4 years here, and looking at the confidence intervals, if it's going to be on the high side, the forecasting that, or the lower side. And it's really interesting. It's interesting. In fact, another slide I'll show you in a second. Depending on when you take that time period from, you go from 2013 or 14 versus going back to 2009. There's this little blip here in the economy. It causes this variance. If you want to go to the next slide, shows this is actually this certified tax for just Lane County itself, not all jurisdictions. So it's actual tax amount versus the assessment amount. And see, this also has a little variance here. This has that 3.25% to that 4.25% as far as looking at the projected revenue that the county will receive. And it's a forecast. It's, at this point in time, it's really the best we can do. I think we landed on the lower side as far as the budget side for the forecast of property tax revenue. Might be a little bit higher than that. We'll see. Going to go to the next slide. One of the components of property tax is always collection. And collection typically falls, I like to blow our own horn. We're very good at collection. In 2020-21, our collection rate was 92.3%. I'm sorry, 98.32%, which is for the 2020-21 tax roll. And so that's collected for the taxing districts. the collection chart here, all this information pretty much is on our website too. So if anyone at home wants to look at this information, every year we have these called salary reports and June 30th reports that are on our website for the past, I believe, 10 or more years. So anyone's welcome to go out there and look at that and find free time. But you can see the prior year collection too, as far as, because every year we also collect a little bit of taxes from prior years that were not collected. And so as you go further out in the years, the percentage rate goes down, but these are extra dollars that we do add into, and it's a separate line when we look at our budget as far as the prior year taxes collected.
And that's pretty good considering we don't till tap anymore.
Yes.
So we used to send out an accounting clerk and the sheriff and go into businesses and tap their till. Say, hey, that's not good PR anymore.
I have a question, though, if I'm reading this right, because I'm looking at the same slide up here, but we still have $10.2 million in remaining uncollected
Correct.
taxes. Is that because, and it's significantly more than previous years, is that because we're still working to collect those and it's the most recent year? And in future years, we can expect that number
Yes.
for this most recent year to go down?
And Lori, the due date is, the third trimester due date is May 15th,
Okay,
which,
so we're just.
as we know, is Sunday, which Monday will be a busy day for us.
So going to the next slide, and this is the second to last slide, so it's kind of where I'm going to leave things off here. This is kind of where I was alluding to originally, a couple slides back, where this is the permanent rate for Lane County and now collected. And looking at taking out the variance of the prior years, prior slides had 2012 and 2015 added in, so it takes that little flip out, taking that little adjustment as far as what you can see in the prior slide. This actually has the upper and lower confidence interval in the forecast. So just again, showing that 3% increase plus the construction, it's really tight as far as just we take out, it kind of depends what years we look at. If I look at shorter period of time, taking out the recession in prior years, we're seeing a pretty good growth as far as the property tax dollars. But there's still that variance that is the unknown component. But I'd say looking at the market, looking at inflation, looking at interest rates, we're still going to see that increase in property tax dollars at least for a couple more years, as far as that upward 3%. I don't foresee a crash in the market. It can't be a variant. Yes, but I think looking forward the next few years, if we do see a softening in the marketplace, it'll be a soft landing versus a crash, mainly because of the shortage in housing supply. That's the biggest component. If this was 10 years ago, I think I'd be a little worried as far as at this point in market where the market is at right now. But with the interest rates still being competitive, even at 6%, that's still historically very low. And so the forecast is very tight that way. Next slide. So that's what we have for you today. Hope it's been fairly entertaining and informative. And any questions at this point in time?
Other questions? Yes, Bruce.
Okay, this is probably a dumb question, but I'm going to. Is there a ratio between real market value and assessed value for existing?
No. There's what I can calculate.
I'm like trying to figure it out.
Then. This is typical. So every single property, so you have 180,000 accounts. Every single property except personal property, and actually that's in utilities, has either a ratio of, could be a ratio of 100% or actually over 100%, then it would be taxed at the real market value. Or it could be, some of the accounts are down to 20%. It just depends what the value they were back in 95. And it's really hard talking to taxpayers because it varies property by property. And hopefully the subdivisions are fairly consistent. But if a property was added, say a year after a neighboring property or a year before, then changed property ratio is going to be different each year. And so subsequently their taxes are not going to be the same for the exact same property. And that is hard to explain to taxpayers.
So are most properties, again, then taxed on assessed or real market then?
Most properties are taxed on their maximum assessed value, which is becomes their assessed value. Yeah, and that's down to that 6% or so, where they're taxed on the real market value versus their maximum assessed value.
I mean, I'll just use mine real quick for an example. Sorry, Chris. Like my real market value is significantly higher than my assessed value, but the house was built in 2006.
So it had gone through a change property ratio in 2006, and what the change property ratio is supposed to do is to give the property tax relief at measure 4750 to new property owners. And it was the attempt by the founders of the writers of measure 47 and then 50, the legislature, the repassing of that to clean it up a little bit. It was an attempt to give the tax break to property owners when you build properties after the original rule was established for measure 50, but it's not perfect.
Thank you.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I was hoping that you might be able to speak a little bit about the impact of the Holiday Farm fire in your department.
Sure.
And how that's going.
Yeah, great. So Holiday Farm fire was a lot of work for us for multiple reasons. One, the laws changed during the Holiday Farm fire for refunds. And so previous to the Holiday Farm fire, refunds were calculated one way, and now with the change in the laws, they're calculated where it's much more beneficial to the taxpayer. And so this prior year, we had to do refunds twice for property owners. We did it under the first original laws, and then when the laws changed, we did it under the new laws as far as looking at the new calculation. And so that was a big lift for our accounting staff, for our front counter, for inspection of properties. We went out and inspected properties that were demolished or partially destroyed or partially destroyed, and for outbuildings. In fact, we're still trying to reconcile some of the books as far as to find out the exact numbers that are out there with public works and with disaster management, as far as trying to make sure all of our books match at the end of the day. But it hit the districts that up the river pretty heavily. Then luckily House Bill 5006, that was 5006, was the funds that provided not a refund, but help make up the loss of the tax dollars for the 2021 year for the tax districts. Those are in fact, the second distribution just went out last week, I believe, as far as for those districts to close to $2.1 million or so, I believe, for all the funds that are going out. And also we have about $500,000 that are going out to uniform distribution for all the districts to help recover some of the refund costs and amount that took out the tax roll for the durations of property taxes for the properties that were destroyed. Beyond that, it'll be more work over the years as we see the rebuilding. So we'll have to send staff out to rebuild and put new properties back in the tax roll. The questions don't continue as far as, so the Holiday Farm fire, I think it went fairly well as far as, but it's an ongoing experience. And I think the more that we can be available for the property owners upriver to help them out as they rebuild, provide information, and better, because it hit them pretty hard, as you know.
So will they be taxed as a new bill versus, you know, how you're describing? Yes. They had previously been taxed at the 95 level plus the changes year after year.
So there was some proposals in the legislature this past year to somehow either have a special rule for the properties of the Holiday Farm or any other areas in the state that were destroyed. That didn't pass as far as for having a different valuation process for the properties that were destroyed. And so when a property rebuilds, it's quite possible it could go on the tax roll at a much higher value, the assessed value, because they'll go through a different change property ratio. And also probability could go on the value tax roll lower on their assessed value because their 95 value minus 3%, it could be a lower number when that calculation is done. And so, but generally, when a property goes through the change property ratio for reconstruction, I think it tends to be on the little higher side, but the intent is to be on market as far as to have those properties blend in with the existing values. But with new construction being built up there, we probably will see some property owners that probably will have higher tax values because they have a brand new house versus an existing older house, and just the valuation of those properties. Hope that helps.
And you know, one thing that we did is in adjusting, we adjusted maximum assessed value for the improvements that were lost. So if there was existing maximum assessed value for on the tax roll for a house and that burned down, we removed that portion of the MAV so that when we add back, we're not adding back on top of existing MAV for that. So we made those adjustments, and that and then, you know, two rounds of refunds happen. So
one of the pieces that we're seeing right now is a lot of questions regarding F2 land. That's a big deal as far as it gets, it kind of goes to the policy questions too. F2 is we have a lot of properties, residential tract properties that are built on F2 properties, and depending on the buildability and the rebuilding, we haven't seen appeals yet for those F2 properties. That could be a component in the future as far as if the restrictions of rebuilding occur that are stronger than the previous. This is again giving you my commentary a little bit here for F2 property. That could have a decrease in the property tax roll as far as it would people not be able to rebuild, or with properties that are being appealed. So we'll see what happens with that.
Excellent. Chris Hazen, I did see your hand up. Question for you?
Sure, yeah, if there's time for a question.
Yes.
Mike, I was looking in the budget document in the folder under department goals and strategic planning. And the language in there states that the new strategic plan focuses on the following 5 areas, and there are 5 listed. One of those is mental health and wellness. And I was just trying to see if, does that actually show up as in the budget someplace else? Because that's the only mention I see of that. And I don't know if that was just kind of curious. Is that a employee benefit program, or how does that just seemed a little bit out of surprising to see it listed in that way?
So one of the pieces that we looked at as far as for assessment taxation, looking inward, and that's really important as far as with COVID and with everything that's been going on, mental health and just overall employee health is so important as far as, and we have outward looking goals, strategic plan as our departmental strategic plan. But mental health and wellness is so important because the staffing, if you don't have that aspect looked at or taken care of, you lose staff time, you lose sickness days, turnover, and that's one area that we're looking at very closely is to make sure, because as we are having high turnover, we want to make sure that people are taken care of in our department, and compensation is just one of the factors, and just the atmosphere and having resources for employees is very important. That's one of the reasons why we kept that inside there. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Any other questions for us?
Seeing none. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mary.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
See you guys. Okay.
It's interesting to see Mackenzie Willamette on there, but not Peace. Competition more or less, but
You're talking about the tax.
And the
light
license.
tax?
Comcast on there, but not that.
Oh my goodness, much larger than life.
I'm not sure if this is tax.
They're not.
Yeah.
They're not.
But didn't the SSC, they like the Valley River Center on there someplace? We're talking about the use of those facilities decreasing and potentially their values. Which were anyway.
My
Are you
first
talking
house in
about on the-
78 was at 11%.
Jay, I
And I thought I got a good deal.
what the interest rate was that's in the first house. What was it?
You're talking about the top 10
Mine was
notice?
18.
Yeah.
And I was so happy when I
Yeah, I
refined
thought
at
it was
12.
interesting too.
I was
looking
happy when
back
I
at
sold it 9 months later and paid off my
The
student.
number of
debts.
parcels, the tax amount, the assessed amount, the
I
market.
had not,
value,
you're open, hang on.
those do not align,
I've been
right?
sorting
So
through
Weyerhaeuser
this.
with
Okay, we'll go ahead and
1,477
move
parcels,
forward.
but 9 fell.
From that house.
Welcome.
Where was it?
I think we're ready.
Good afternoon. Fair Budget Committee, thank you for inviting us today to hear about the ARPA program. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce our team. We are a team of 3 in the ARPA program, American Rescue Plan. I'm joined by Alex Dreer. She's our senior grants analyst and helps us with this program, and also Valerie Vanacker. And she's our senior program coordinator in our program. We manage the ARP program here for the county, and we manage approximately 60 projects currently going on throughout the county, a lot of the financial administration. We also do quarterly reporting in regards to state and federal requirements, because as you can imagine, this is direct funding from the US Treasury. There's a lot of strings attached as far as reporting information to them and making sure we're accountable to every dollar, which of course we are. And so we spend a lot of time doing that. Sub-recipient monitoring, we're also giving out, we have given out grants to other agencies, nonprofits, 10 agencies so far. So we are doing pre and post award monitoring with those contracts as well. And as they submit reimbursements requests, we go through all their documentation. And a lot of that is the work that Valerie does on a day-to-day basis in contract administration. As you know, and we'll talk a little bit about it, the board maybe is aware already, we're working on a $3 million grant making process. So we're prepping for that, and we'll be administering those programs as well too. Next slide, please. I know a lot of you may be familiar with the American Rescue Plan Act, but there also may be people listening, or some of the budget community members may not have heard this information as much, but I'm going to review what the American Rescue Plan Act is all about. And for those of you that have heard this a number of times, you'll be able to recite it to any of your constituents that ask you about what is the American Rescue Plan Act. So as the screen shows, it was passed in 2021. In March 2021 is when President Biden signed it. And it was intended to deliver much needed resources across the country. And it was built to meet the moment by providing central aid on 3 fronts. It's to families, to businesses, and to local governments. Next slide, please. Again, this slide focuses on really the 5 specific areas that the American Rescue Plan Act was focused on. There's payments to individuals and households. You may remember the $1,400 payment that a lot of households received, or child tax payments, the unemployment extension, emergency rental assistance. All of those funding requests fell out of that bucket of money. There's business relief. That was part of the American Rescue Plan Act. That's things like the Paycheck Protection Program and other resources to help businesses. There were payroll benefits and other similar incentives there. Schools received direct funding, health in the pandemic, and as well as state and local governance. And that's where we are, obviously, today. It's in the state and local assistance for governments. There was $350 billion dedicated to that. And that's really where our focus is when we talk about American Rescue Plan Act. It's on that last category, it's state and local assistance. And it's referred to as coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. And it's named that way because really the intent in this area was to provide fiscal relief for local governments. Next slide. This is just a breakdown that you can see of how the pie chart of how American Rescue Plan Act funds was divided across these different program areas. About 49%, or half, of the combined funding was to directly support individuals, families, and households. Our portion of the fiscal recovery funds is highlighted in the red there. It's that light green, medium green color. 350 billion was dedicated to local governments. And that's really, again, what our focus is here today. Next slide. Another way to look at it here, US counties received in total across the US 65.1 billion. Cities received also 65.1 billion. Combined, it's 130 billion across the US. In Oregon, we received 4.26 billion in total, with the state getting 2.6 of that directly. You can see Lane County's allocation of 74 million, along with the cities of Eugene, Springfield, and then the combined other public sector agencies that receive direct funds, for a total of 132. Next slide. I mentioned Lane County received $74 million in allocation. Now we've actually received 37 million of that, or half of it, the first tranche, they call it, or the first payment, back in May of last year, 2021. We are expecting the second half of the 74 million allocation to come in literally any day now. We've sent in a request for it, and so we're hoping within the next few weeks we'll get that second tranche of funding to come into the county. We didn't receive it all up front. The board has allocated funds already of that 74 million. We've actually allocated 59 million of that. No, 65 million of those funds already. But we knew we weren't spending all that money right away, so we could pre-allocate some of those dollars to the projects that were needed. Next slide, please. A little more general comments about the American Rescue Plan Act. There are eligible categories or ways that you can spend these funds. You just can't spend them on anything that you want. The Treasury provides the guidance for this, and they came out with 4 specific categories of how you need to spend these funds. They labeled them A, B, C, and D. Obviously, one of the main uses, though, of these funds is to support the response to the public health emergency, because it's ongoing, and address the negative economic impacts that really have the longer lasting effects from this pandemic as well. Premium pay for essential workers was another category. Replace public sector revenue loss. And then finally, D, infrastructure, specifically water, wastewater, and broadband. Focus on category C for a little bit, replace lost public sector revenue. Within that, that's how they labeled it, but it's really focusing on the provision of government services, where if your government did lose money during this, then you can use those funds to pay for general government services. And that's where we focus on our spending here in a lot of areas that covers all those other categories. Next slide. The Treasury didn't say specifically how you can spend your funds, but they did provide general categories that where you can spend these funds. 83 specific categories in 7 distinct areas, and they laid out specific requirements in some of these areas that your expenditure needs to fit one of these. If it's outside of these, then you can't use the funds for any of these categories. Next slide. Along with eligible uses, they did have to let us know how you cannot spend these funds. So you cannot spend these funds on pension. We know unfunded pension liability is a large cost for a lot of governments. They said you cannot use your funds to pay off your pension debt. Also, rainy day funds or reserves. You just can't take these funds and stick them in a reserve. You can have like we do have 4 million set aside for contingency for that unexpected or unknown or continual response. We can temporarily set that aside, but we just can't put it in the general fund reserve, right? General infrastructure, so outside of water, broadband, and sewer, it's not used for general infrastructure projects out of other categories. And then debt and legal services. If you've already made a commitment to something else, you just can't use these funds to pay your debt payments, because that's not in response to the pandemic. You already had that commitment prior. So you can't pay your debt settlements for that. Next slide, please.
Robert, just to clarify, the
Yes.
reserve, the set aside, it really isn't reserves, it's a set aside, and it still falls in the, we will still have to allocate it by the end of 24 and spend it by the end of 26.
That is
Right.
correct, and that's this slide right here. So thank you. It's a great segue into the timeline.
Did you use this race?
Allocated.
We did not coordinate that earlier. Yeah. The covered period for this is really expenditures for this are eligible as of March 3rd, 2021. And we do need to spend the funds by December 31st, 2024. However, they've given us a leeway to give us more time. Your funds must be obligated or committed you've signed a contract, you have a purchase order, you're committed to spending this money by December 31st, 2024, then they give you another 2 years to spend it. So for example, infrastructure projects, it takes a long time to build things and get things done when it's a big construction project at times, right? Smaller than just, or longer than just buying something. So they give you another 2 years to finish out some of those projects. Let's see. Oh, and I know at first, when we first got these funds a year ago, when the board, we were having some of these discussions, and at first it seemed like some things were taking a little time moving. We were working off of an interim final rule where the Treasury gave us some initial guidance. Well, they finally, as of just April, so last month, April 1st, 2022, issued their final rule, which is really what the final requirements of using and spending these funds came out. They did have a provision, if you made some commitments under the interim final rule, we'll still let you spend funds in those areas. All of our projects were fine. But then you also, now here's the final rule, and there were some changes in it.
And you don't expect another letter coming up saying April Fools.
Right? That's right. What a day to come out.
Right.
Next slide, please. So just a reminder for the board members, but also to bring everyone up to date with the budget committee members. The board has been talking about American Rescue Plan Act funds for quite a while, and just a really high level highlight of some of the milestones that we've been to. As I mentioned, in May of 2021, we originally first got our funds. That's also when the board set aside and made a decision for a separate fund to track these, budgetary fund to track these funds. And also the board created guiding principles and priorities for the use of these funds. And we've been working off those since. In December is when the board first allocated 34 projects for a total of about $55 million. And we had a process for that as well. In February, we did receive from the state ARPA funds, $13 million. And the board allowed us and allocated those funds to the 21 projects that were specifically identified in the state legislation there. In March of 22, we came back to the board again and we allocated an additional about $10 million to 5 projects. And one of those projects of that $10 million is $3 million for a community grant making process. And that is what's projected there in that last bullet point is when the board approved that. And we'll go to the next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Trier, who's going to talk about the remaining portion of the ARC fund.
Thank you. Welcome. Hello, everyone. The ARC team is committed to engaging stakeholders and the community to inform the use of American Rescue Plan Act funds. So we developed a community survey, which received over 1,800 responses. That's a really great response. The survey provided education about what Lane County had already allocated funding for, and also asked respondents to rank eligible uses of funds in order of importance. Community members were able to give meaningful input on where they'd like to see Lane County invest American Rescue Plan Act funds. Public health projects, in particular mental health services, ranked as the highest overall need in the survey. Next slide. Next slide. Based on the community input gathered, the allocations designated by the county commissioners to date actually reflected the needs of the community. So that's really excellent to hear that the commissioners have an ear to the ground as far as the needs of the community. In particular, the highest need for mental health services was reflected in the investment in the Respite and Stabilization Center of $7 million. Public health response has also been allocated $1.1 million, which includes projects like the South Lane Community Health Clinic and Dental Clinic in Cottage Grove, and a public health equity and resiliency project. Next slide. We're going backwards. We're going to go forward. So Lane County, the city of Eugene, and the city of Springfield received direct allocations of American Rescue Plan Act funds, and smaller cities in Lane County received allocations of ARPA funds from the state of Oregon. So this totals over $159 million coming to Lane County's geographic area. And this total does not align with the total you saw earlier, because the earlier total was only direct allocations, and then the state gave some of their ARPA allocation to the smaller cities in Lane County. Next slide. In addition to our duties ensuring compliance with ARPA funds, the ARPA team serves as conveners for countywide and regional grant collaboration. So we coordinate weekly countywide grant collaboration meetings with staff across the different departments. Together, we share updates on grants we're working on, promoting opportunities for cross-department collaboration, which makes for more competitive grant applications. Alex Kyler, Intergovernmental Relations Manager, is a key contributor in these meetings, and he shares his knowledge of potential funding from legislative sources. So in this way, we are better prepared to anticipate notices of funding that will be published, because usually once they're published, you have like a month to write your grant application and prepare. So this way we kind of have an idea what might be coming. We also have started a weekly email that shares grant opportunities across departments, and continue to reach out as we hear about different opportunities. The ARPA team is also researching grant management software tools, which was an ARPA funded project. Some of the tools we are researching have features that include grant research modules that will help you identify federal, state, and local funding sources that we as a county would be eligible for. So that could be all in one place. Other features we're looking at could include assigning different staff different things to do, like look at this grant, and then you could look in this one software and say, oh, I see that this department is looking at this grant. Well, this other department is interested in it as well. We can collaborate. So we're looking at some modern tools that we can use to streamline collaboration across the departments. We also meet twice a month with the cities of Eugene and Springfield to make sure our ARPA projects and other funding projects coordinate and complement each other. We are actively tracking forthcoming funding opportunities, and two of those include broadband and wildfire relief and recovery. So in regards to broadband, we know the state of Oregon should receive $120 million in ARPA funds for broadband projects. They're currently standing up the Oregon Broadband Office, and they're in a rulemaking phase right now. We anticipate opportunities for funding next year. The state should also receive broadband funding from the federal infrastructure law. So we are keeping tabs on that. And then there's the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief Fund. The Department of Housing and Urban Development appropriated $422 million to the state of Oregon for recovery efforts in response to the 2020 Labor Day fires. So those funds are going to be administered by Oregon Housing and Community Services. We are watching closely. They've released a draft action plan for those funds, and we are following closely because we have a lot of needs, as you are aware, related to wildfire recovery and response. Next slide. Not for a picture. This is a visual example of the work that we do in the ARPA team. So the ARPA team is the star, and we have this, because we're the stars. I made it, so I got to be the star. We facilitate communication across departments. So here's an example. The Wheeler Pavilion needs an HVAC system. That was an ARPA project. It was submitted as an ARPA project from Public Works. It was not funded, but so that came to our awareness, and there was a funding opportunity from the state of Oregon for cleaner air shelters. So the ARPA team helped facilitate communication from emergency management, Health and Human Services Division staff who actually would operate emergency programs like the Warming Center, Cleaner Air Shelter, or Cooling Centers, and Lane Event Center Public Works staff whose facility it is. So we helped coordinate all those partners, and it was like, oh, who's on first? Okay, well, who's gonna ask the state and let them know we're interested? We have a project. So actually, I got the ball rolling and told the state, hey, we're interested, and I'll coordinate if there's more work to be done for that. So that concludes our formal presentation.
Excellent. Questions from the committee? Yes, Commissioner.
In reverse order, when you talked about the wildfire recovery, is that the CDBG DR money? Is that okay?
Yes.
Great. So two questions. One about reallocation or changing allocations. Do we have to do that by the end of 24? So if, in other words, if we've designated money to a project and then we find another funding source for it, does that, or is it before it's expended at the end of 26? If we're spending it internally, not we're granting it out somewhere else?
We would need to obligate it by 12/31/2024. So we should know by that time where it is actually going to be spent at that time.
Okay. So these other potential opportunities like broadband, like some of the water, our parks, deferred maintenance things, those have to be, other sources have to be locked down, have to be secured by the end of next calendar year for us to move that money out of the ARPA program.
Before the end of December 31st,
Yeah.
2024.
24 next year. I'm jumping
Yeah.
ahead of next year,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
And I will say there is a little bit of ambiguity in this, in that, as you know, the board specifically allocates dollars. And so there is some question back with Treasury as far as what is obligated to be. Traditionally, it's the contract, it's the PO, like the purchase order, like we talked about, it's contractually obligated. But if the board is allocated it instead it's for a specific project and it's been obligated, is there a little leeway there? We're waiting for some more direction on that, but at this point it's by December 31st, 2024.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, is the more internal projects, not the ones we're sending out, okay. And then with the grants management software, which is very exciting, and I was sort of shocked to find we didn't already have that. I was really happy to see that as a line item that we could do that. Is there an opportunity or a benefit to sharing licenses with other jurisdictions, or are we just doing it internally cross-department here at Lane County?
We haven't proceeded that far yet in the software. We're still investigating different proprietary softwares that are out there and what we can do. Traditionally, this one in particular that we are favoring, I'd say, is they offer a limited number of licenses, a certain quantity, but there is some view capability, or we can send emails to someone and they can research then and find information that's needed. But traditionally, because there is a cost based on the
Per
number
license,
of licenses, it's been within there, but we are able to share what we find with other sources.
Great, okay. Yeah, that's exciting.
Other questions, Commissioner?
Just a quick question, you may want to answer this later. The recovery center, the navigation recovery center, the facility on River Avenue, did you say how many dollars went into that? Oh, no, I'm sorry. The recovery center is the one that we've not built yet. Right.
$7
Sorry,
million
I mixed my
for the stabilization
center. Right.
It's been allocated to that.
All right. So my question regarding River Avenue is not pertinent for this discussion.
And you might want to answer it later.
No, we did purchase that with CARES Act dollars.
Yes, yeah.
Which preceded ARPA funding.
Which means that we own it wholly, and if we decide it's excess, it can go into general fund if we sell it. But well, you don't need to answer that.
Well, no, but if the county owns an asset, then the county owns the asset.
Unless it's
Depending on the strings that might
for
be
instance, but
Right. But and I'm not to belabor this now, but in this particular instance, the county owns that asset and there are more strings. And we're trying to do that as much as possible so that whether it relates to homelessness or some catastrophe or what have you, we control real estate as opposed to rent it.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
And one
Sorry,
point of clarification, when you do use federal funds to purchase a property, unless there's an exception granted, whatever percent the federal government's paid at the time of disposal of that, you may owe funds back to the federal government for their portion. In the CARES Act, there was an exception for that, so we do.
That's right.
That.
Yeah.
thank you.
Mr. Hazen, question.
Can we go back to the slide where the authorized uses of this fund are enumerated? Okay. Does the next one have any more details? You skipped over it, but okay, it's the same list. So my question was just about the public feedback that was received. I agree that's great, 1,800 responses. I heard that the mental health was sort of top of the list with regard to the public interest. in how these funds would be utilized. There was mention of the respite center. Are there other plans for additional spending in that category, or are there other programs that respond to that public interest in mental health that I maybe didn't hear or are still in the works?
We do have our $3 million of community grant making process that is going out to the community, and that's for some of the, we assume there may be some proposals that may be related to mental health services at that time. Obviously, we don't know yet when they come in, but that is one area where that will be expanded on. And also in public health, as mentioned, we do have that contingency that we're holding on right now. We don't know yet if we'll have to allocate additional dollars to the remaining public health emergency response that's going on. And so that's why we do have some of that contingency as well. Other than that, the board hasn't directed any additional specific spending in a certain area or offered at this time. I don't know, Mr. Mokreisky or Mr. wants to add.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I maybe would add is that there peripherally, for example, there's a significant investment in improvements at the jail. 60% of the population of the jail suffers from mental health issues, and the sheriff's office has increasingly expanded and enhanced services, mental health related services within the jail, with an effort to get towards a behavioral health crisis and stabilization center, because they recognize the jail is not the right place. But I just did a tour on, I don't know, Monday, or I think it was, of the jail with Captain Riley and some from our behavioral health team. And the captain talked about some of the improvements that are going to be made to the jail to address issues related to both flow of traffic and mental health services that are provided there. So that's another example. I think it's 17 million.
Yeah,
$17 million of the money that has been allocated to date is going towards jail improvement. So that's why I would just say it's not a direct investment towards a specific mental health service, but it certainly will, at the very least, indirectly impact the quality of mental health related services that the sheriff's office provides in that facility.
Yeah, and one other point is important to remember, this is just a summary of the ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan Act dollars. There are a lot of which we're following state funding for behavioral health and mental services as well, that we're tracking those dollars, and that's where another pot of money is opening up that the county can go for those services as well.
And so, and where is more information available about the community grant program coming up? Where do people go for that?
On our website, lanecounty.org, lanecountyor.gov/ARPA. And the request for applications will go live Monday.
Got it.
And there should be a media release coming out Monday, social media as well, posted on the website on Monday. So yes, lanecounty.org/ARPA or lanecountyor.gov/ARPA. Either one works, just remember /ARPA. And that's where you can find all the information, as well as detailed information about all the projects that have been approved and the history of all the board sessions as well, so the public can go find out all of the discussions we've had on this. It's all public information, and we make it available.
Mr. Mokreisky, please. Yes, I believe Chris is done.
I just would ask maybe to go to the slide with the star on it, Alex's star. I just wanted to make this point that, Robert and the team have given this presentation. We appreciate that you've given it a few times this week already. We wanted to highlight this area for the budget committee because it is new. There's a significant amount of investment that's going into the organization, the community from these funds. And as Robert talked about, this team is new. The structure is new. And it really, the idea here, as we talked about in the last couple of years, crisis brings change and opportunity to both, there's a need to manage the challenges from the crisis and also an opportunity to seize, ways in which we can become even better. And so with this funding, we've been very intentional in saying, let's not just say we're going to collect this money and distribute it. Let's make sure we actually capture the opportunity. that we're transparent and accountable in how we spend these resources, that we put the resources into the places that are going to have the greatest impact for the community, and that we identify ways in which we can create connections. And so this sort of, I love the story that Alex was talking about. It was not specifically an ARPA project, right? But part of what we're doing with this team, an extension of this is the policy team, and you look at in a number of ways, I bring forward our emergency management office that was sort of buried in one part of the organization. We've moved it, we've expanded that, and so much of what we're trying to do in a large county government is oftentimes spread out a lot of ways. It has these different pockets of areas that are focused on their area. Make sure that we are creating connection, right? And understanding of the interconnected, Steve Adams called it, what do you call it? The spaghetti monster is what he called the policy team. It's like, well, that's the new name for the policy team, is the spaghetti monster. This complex web of different issues that are interconnected at some point, but if we don't understand or find those interconnections, and so I thought Alex did a great job of kind of explaining that it's not just about the money we're collecting and distributing, it's also about how we understand the different things that are happening, view potential for opportunity, create a connection, right, that we may not have known existed. So I'm just really excited about these types of things we're doing to do a better job of recognizing the interconnection of services and projects and people doing different work.
I love that. I see it as we're really leveraging the money to create a system. Like it's in response, but it's creating a system that will serve us well beyond the response. So like that grants management software is a great example of that. Because well, then we'll have it. We'll use it when it's not an emergency. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Additional questions?
Just want to know if that's the flying spaghetti monster.
I think, I'm guessing, seriously, I remember being at some conference where they talked about some organizations are waffles and some are spaghettis, because waffles have the little squares and you pour the syrup and it stays in every little square.
Just like way
Whereas the spaghetti's all tangled and the sauce is on all of it.
I don't even know what.
No, it's a great metaphor. Sometimes you want a waffle where the syrup stays in the square. Do not put syrup on the spaghetti. Do not put marinara on a waffle.
We have some time now to expand on that.
That's right. We have an open session later. Yeah.
I'm glad we could be your last presentation.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to take let's take a short break. Let's do 10 minutes and then we'll come back and finish up with some other things. We have some open time and some other recap information.
Hey, Steve,
We can have
the flags are
waffles.
lowered for 1 million COVID.
Yeah,
You heard
I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like
reconvene here, and we're going to start off this next section. This is a point in the agenda that we left ourselves some flexibility to fill gaps and to address anything that we wanted to get together and discuss as a group. Commissioner Bosevich, you brought forward a topic and you presented some questions. I know you got some information back. We made sure that we had resources available at this point of the meeting from land management and from HHS that can provide any additional feedback that we need. Commissioner Bosevich, you want to take the floor?
Sure, thank you. And I spent some significant time going back through human services budget and looking at the general fund expenditures that were identified in that. Also just looking at divisions and over time, whether they were underspending their resources, if their resources were higher than expenditures over time, or actually gaining possible reserves that weren't, that are building up in the health and human services funds. And was looking, at, also my historical knowledge. And I guess this is going to depend on my memory somewhat, which you might want to correct. But over the years, the amount of general fund going into health and human services outside of youth services has steadily been increasing without a lot of direction from the budget committee or the board to have that increase continue, because that as we went through the 11-12 budget, 12-13, and when we were making those real dollar cuts to it, there was a conscious decision made to basically limit the amount of general fund that went to health and human services. Specifically, it was being spent in public health and mostly in communicable disease. And that was about it, that was, and youth services got some, and that was the only and now it seems like it's spread into other departments, including human services, and that growth of the general fund in that department is part of why I was looking at that issue, and also just seeing some of the departments gaining, reserves over time, and wondering if they could be using reserves, and we could take that general fund and possibly move it over to land management. After looking through all that and thinking about, one, it's kind of late in the game to ask for a bunch of changes like that. I'm not going to try and propose any major changes to HMHS's budget. I do think it would be good for maybe the committee to either write a budget note or think about strategizing around that issue, because I think there's an opportunity, and Steve mentioned this in his budget message about getting some of the areas like the clinics and other places in HHS to actually be revenue generating centers and be more efficient with how those generate revenue, and displace some of that general fund and wean HHS back off that general fund. Because the other reason why I'm not going to make a proposal is I understand the general fund is currently not structurally balanced. We're borrowing from reserves this year anyway. So, I looked it over. I wrote up actually a couple proposals to move money around like that, where I was going to take some general fund from a particular program, reallocate it over to LMD, and have them make it up from reserve. I'm not going to do it for a couple reasons. One, I think that needs to happen over time. Two, we've got new management. They're also having a lot of turnover in financial staff too that's relatively new. There's a huge disruption of moving youth services out somewhat right now, and the reaccounting for that. I'd like to see their books settle a little bit before I started making those kind of proposals. And there's also some opportunities, like with the WIC program reestablishing and getting the clinics up. I can see giving them some more time. On the other hand, I did get some questions answered about video lottery dollars from Christine, which was really informative. We do have a board policy around that 50% going to staff, but we're not at the 50% level. We're underspending that right now, and the remainder of that's going into a reserve, video lottery reserve, which is currently at 4.4 million, if I remember the email correctly. Yeah, like I said, I remember the numbers. If we were to go up to that 50% limit, that's about another $650,000 a year for the next budget year, and probably that prediction of video lottery money coming in next year is 2.3 million is a conservative prediction based, on past COVID downward trends in video lottery and projecting those out. So it may actually go up depending on what happens with COVID and the venues that host video lottery machines. So I'm going to probably develop a proposal to look at having 650,000 go into LMD to supplement their budget. And at the same time, I'd like to have LMD look at their fee proposal that they're proposing to raise their fees and see what that impact would be of that 650,000 to what they need for projected fee increases. And if that, the change in that projected fee increase. And I believe that in the description of what video lottery money is eligible for, land management fits into that description because it's meant to be used for economic development. And, I think having assessment taxation here earlier, talking about new assessed values and how they come on the books and everything, land management is pretty much the front edge of the spear somewhat in new housing, new developments coming into the county. And I think it would be an important thing. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I think we need to put a bookmark in the general fund, H&HS, and look at how we can try and pull that back somewhat, because when we were extremely short on general fund, and it's the one thing we can spend on law enforcement and some other places. We had them down to like 2 million, I think, and it's growing past 7 million. And that 2 million back then included youth services, I believe. So that's kind of where I am.
So if I could real quick to frame our discussion, thank you, Commissioner Bosevich, for bringing forward the topic and so forth. What I want to kind of do now is to make sure that we're investing some time here for any places where we need to tease out additional information and so forth. I guess what I'm asking for is to use this time for that versus necessarily debate on this topic, because I think we're going to have that opportunity later. Commissioner Buck, please.
I didn't have a debate on topic. I just had a clarifying question. The video lottery money that you're interested in is that's one-time money, right? Not ongoing, that you were thinking.
I would propose it be an ongoing subsidy to land management from the video lottery. The video lottery is an ongoing revenue stream to the county.
Okay, that's all. I'm
Yeah,
just curious.
so it wouldn't be coming out of the 4.4 million, it'd be coming out of the 2.3 of projected revenue for the next year. Instead of, and then the amount that's going into that reserve would be 650,000 less.
Commissioner Bergen.
Oh,
I
was wanting to get back to what you said you wanted this time to be about, because I don't want to discuss at this moment. It's such a far-reaching set of thoughts where there's no proposal particularly attached to them right now.
Are there any points that you think that or any additional information that you would like us to discuss or from staff?
No, I'm good.
To inform us on this, okay. Other individuals? Oh, yes, Mr. Hazen, please.
Yeah, your last comment, Herb, is there other information from staff that could be helpful? If there is going to be a discussion about the Health and Human Services budget, one of the things that was in previous years, and I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, package was more information that the Health and Human Services Department does track to do with their metrics. In other words, how they're doing as a function. And I was looking for that in this year's budget presentation. It didn't seem like there was as much as there has been in the past. So I could be misrecalling on that, but just I would invite that if we're going to have that discussion about the Health and Human Services budget, that some additional sort of performance metrics information could be helpful to look at in that as part of that discussion.
Thank you. Anything else on this one particular topic? Commissioner Farr?
Yes, a lot, but just one thing. There are so many ways we can track the progress of Health and Human Services. The numbers are just clearly there, and the numbers are going in this direction across the board. Let's take a look at, for instance, primary care. How many people do we provide primary care for? I mean, that's a number that's easy to generate. And even though that is, that comes through different revenue, it comes through general fund, it's easy to track how many people we are serving and how many lives are absolutely changed by the work that we do in Health and Human Services. Numbers are easy to gain. And I'm not asking you to do that at this point in time, but I think many cases it's just pushing a button and it spits the number out because the progress is there.
Yeah.
Mr. Pryor. I guess what I'm most interested in and what's been helpful in this budget process has been projections. Because if we're saying, how are we going to spend money in the future in terms of deciding how to allocate money in the future in whatever form, I need to know where I think that money is going to be needed, not based on how far we drove in the past, but how many more miles we have in front of us. And so as I think having this information about performance is great. And I want that performance information to then move right into projecting how much more need will we have? How many more Health and Human Services clients are we going to be serving? What kind of growth are we anticipating in each one of those different areas? Is it going to decline in one area or increase in another? Is it going to change? Because to think about how you want to spend the money in the future depends a lot on what you think is going to happen in the future. And I'm perfectly happy if you want to create 2 or 3 different scenarios to say, if this scenario happens, we'll need these resources. If this scenario happens, we'll need these. I'm fine with that. But it's much easier for me to think how I want to allocate money if I know what I'm going to need it for. And I think land management is an important one. I also think Health and Human Services is another one. I think you can pretty much across the board say, I've got to know where you think you're going to need that money. So whatever projections and scenarios you can create will really help a lot. And I think we're talking about Health and Human Services, and I think that's one that just has huge amounts of impact. And I need to know what that is either going to grow into or look like.
Excellent. Commissioner Bosich?
I just want to clarify one more time. I'm not going to propose any changes to Health and Human Services.
No.
Okay. I just want to make sure that was clear because there's a lot of discussion about if we're going to make changes. And the only thing I'm talking about, and I won't be here for next year's budget, but I think it's something that the budget committee, and Bruce has said this, I have some history that, some that you all don't. And one of the histories was traditionally Health and Human Services was not a general fund department and had very low general fund support. And that's been growing without a real conscious decision to grow that. And that's what in the future, you guys need to wrestle with that.
And Jay, my response was to his comments, not yours.
Yeah. Just want to make sure that was understood.
Mr. Rokowski, you had a point to make.
Go ahead, I'm still for it.
Commissioner?
Well, I just think not so much in response to that, but somewhat to what Chris Pryor was just saying, and what I've observed from last year when we approved a couple of new positions, and now with this policy team piece, it is getting somewhat at what you're talking about, which is less about counting numbers of service delivery over here and projecting, but as an organization, projecting to the future, what is the way we need to structure the operations of this organization across department and within departments to be the most efficient stewards of the dollars for the best outcome? And I think the policy team is a big part of what's going to help us get there as a way of focusing the work. And then things like the set aside of ARPA dollars for behavioral health stabilization, because the impact having that service will have on jail operations, because we're using that as a de facto treatment, and that impacts outcomes, right? There's a difference between the outputs, how many people are we funneling through a service, and what are the outcomes for those individuals. So I think we're in a really exciting transformational space around, because of this multiple catastrophes we've been through, and these new dollars that we have give us an opportunity to think in new ways, exactly about what you're saying, Chris, about what are we anticipating the needs going to be in the future and how are we going to meet them. And it's not going to always be taking what we've always done and rearranging some of the dollars. It's actually really innovating in new ways of new programs and new ways of organizing the team that we already have in place to get the work done.
Yes.
I think we're really doing that. We're just in a transformational place. And I really appreciate you bringing that up about lottery dollars, but then also not pushing to try to make something happen now, because we are in that transformational space. And I think we might see that opportunity differently once we get our legs under us with this new structure, particularly with the policy team. I think it's going to really make some real changes in how we look at the budget.
Formulated, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree. I think that I'm interested in, once we conclude this process, what your all reflection on this year is going to be, because it's been different than in prior years. So far, I feel like I've really appreciated the conversation. Like, this conversation right here is the type of conversation that I think a budget committee should be having, and we don't have this conversation every year. So I think it's very thoughtful. We put forward a budget. We were very clear about, look, we're doing a lot of stuff. The county's in generally a really good place, but we have these 4 areas that right now and going forward are not only structurally imbalanced, but we don't know how to get those in line, right? The Parks Fund, parole probation, land management, the general fund being the biggest one. Talked about land management, and we talked about, the solution there is either fees or a subsidy. So you have a budget committee member that's proposing an idea, and I think there's probably some merit to that, and it's worth a discussion. There's some trade-off on what the impact of that would be, but it's definitely that's a longer term, at least partial solution that helps get us on a road in that fund. On the Parks Fund, we've talked a little bit about there's going to need to be some policy decision and some taxpayer support for that one, right? So we'll see if we can get that one in line. And then parole and probation, really we rely on state funding. And so we're going to need to continue to make a push on the legislative front. And then there's the general fund, which is like just every year. I mean, look at Tanya, before you retired, you're here for 20 years, or, you said that. 27 years. So the general fund is just like Groundhog Day. I mean, it's just, this is the general fund. And I think Commissioner Bozovich's point about, and even I've had conversations about this. We did sort of beat around the bush a little bit in the budget message that we need, in my experience in county governments over the last 20 plus years, and this is the best county government, I mean, with all sincerity, in terms of the lack of siloization, the tunnel vision, but we still have it. Counties tend to have tunnel vision because they're big. We've got 32 different buckets of money, 32 funds that we spread, right? They all have their own strings attached. And the general fund is the only one that doesn't have strings attached. You can spend it however you want. So that's why we talk so much about the general fund, and why general funds everywhere tend to subsidize these areas that are more distressed or harder to fund. So, so I think it's good that we're having this conversation. I think we do have new leadership in H&H. You got a new director, you got a new admin manager, you've got a new CHC man, you've got a bunch of new folks there. So just to reflect again on county governments, that we tend to, 32 different funds. You got all these different ways we charge people for fees, we collect tax, and they're restricted, right? And so we think differently about how you can spend that money. And so and then we're all focused on, I got to deliver this service. I got this money, I'm going to deliver this service. We're focused on that. And so we're forced into this mentality of like, this is all I'm thinking about. And what we're trying to do, more organization, you talk about the policy team, you think about these other areas, the ARPA team, where we're trying to come out of that and go, let's just come out of this tunnel that we're in and think a little bit more broadly. So that is, you know, when we proposed this budget with the use of reserves, part of the idea was buying some time to do these, to have these thoughtful conversations, because I don't hear Commissioner Bozeman saying one thing is more important than the other, and we should raise this fund to fund that thing. It's more like, how do we, you hit on this, Commissioner Trigger, how do we think differently about and sort of more creatively about the interconnection of resources we collect and how we can actually leverage more of them to fund these other things. So that's where we want to go, is this sort of thoughtful, collaborative, coordinated approach to funding all the, no, we don't want to cut anything because we're still delivering fewer services than the community needs right now. If anything, we need more money in a lot of different places. So I appreciate this discussion. I think that it's worth carrying it forward to next week, you know, and have the discussion you're going to have, and definitely your thoughts and direction as we head into next year. And I think it's going to take us a couple years. It didn't take us overnight, it didn't take 1 year to balance a $6 million structural deficit in the road fund and the general fund. It took like 3 or 4 years. And we did it thoughtfully. We did it without cutting and gutting positions and services. And I think we can do that again, but it's going to take, you know, it's not going to be easy to do. And so that would be our ask, is like, let's understand what the direction we want to head, give us the direction that you'd like to see, give us some time to go do that work and bring back over the course of the next few years some proposals that can get us back on a track to structural balance, continue to fund the things that are really critical. I think performance measure and evaluating the success and how we deliver service is always important to do. So yeah, thank you.
Great, Chris. Talking for a second about performance measures, I think, you know, we've talked about it before. I think performance measures are extremely important, particularly if you want to know how many miles per gallon I get on the car so I can know how far I can go. And I don't need to know the cylinder compression ratio. I don't need to know the injector, you know, pressure point. I don't need to know that, but I need to know the performance of the car well enough, or you need to know the performance of the car well enough that you can sit in this room and say, this car will go 500 miles. And I have the performance measures. I know the cylinder ratios and the injector rates and all that kind of stuff, that I can confidently say that the performance of this car has been measured to the point where we can go 500 miles. Now, which direction do we want to go for 500 miles? So it's a delicate balance that says we've got to have those performance measures. You have to have those performance measures, because we can't create those scenarios unless we know our performance well enough to know how far we can go. And I mean, financially speaking, with the money that we have. So do those performance measures need to be looked at in detail at the budget committee? Maybe not as much as the performance measures need to be looked at very closely by you and maybe by the board, so that when we get together, we know very clearly how far we can go. And I'm okay with you saying we can go here, we can go here, we can go here, and talk about how you want to do that. But I'm not saying we don't want to know what the performance is. I think we need to know how the performance can dictate our future and where we want to go. So we need both. But I'm more interested in what the performance says in terms of where we can go with it. Does that make sense?
It does to me. Mr. Murkowski.
Well, I think you're spot on, Mr. Pryor, and you don't have time. You have, I mean, this is like that's one of the disadvantages that the budget committee has, is you've got a couple of weeks to digest a lot of information. And so you have to rely on the information we're giving you and where we're pointing you. And I think we're trying to be pretty clear in saying, these are the areas that are problematic. This is where we're concerned. We may not need an answer this second, but we need you to know that these are the areas we're concerned about. These are the areas you should be focused on, and we need your help. So I just want to say, I think the conversation you're having is the right conversation.
in the discussions you've had about these 4 funds that we're pointing to and saying, this is a problem, and how do we look at our revenue sides and how, so I think you're right. Performance measures are valuable. It's important, but they're valuable at different levels. And I just, you know, for you to look across 32 funds and $900 million of services and all of it, I mean, we don't have the time to do it.
Commissioner Burney.
This is kind of a fun conversation. It's very conceptual. I would like to suggest one as there's an element of trust here, and for me at least, as chair last year, I truly learned to trust the integrity of the staff and the transparency with which they gave me information. Because even as Board of Commissioner members, we're not running the bus. Number one. Number two, I think that as I've been in groups where I didn't trust the executive director or whoever. I think as an agency, as a county government, this is a time where we are creating more inefficiencies and coordination as a result to deal with the fact that the silos by which we get the money are not coordinated and are not efficient. And actually, they tend to generate inefficiencies at the local government level where the rubber hits the road. So I think, interestingly, the point and the analogy you bring up, Chris, couldn't be more accurate. But we're also in this period of I think, really transformation internally of county government, where that information today isn't going to be the same information tomorrow. And where I want to see this sort of policy group, this whatever spaghetti monster, whatever it was referred to, I want to see, because I think we will see the efficiencies that are created, the catalytic relationships between programs that don't now currently exist, and some new ways to deliver services against populations where we're not delivering services to all the people that need them in almost any area. So I think I think everything that's been discussed is true. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but I think we're at a point where you're trying to do just that, to generate data that's a little more relevant after you've got this new management structure in place. That's the end of my conceptual talk.
Excellent. Thank you for that conceptual approach. To back up to one of the early portions of Commissioner Burney's comments, I've been on this committee long enough to remember before Mr. Mokrowski was here. And I can tell you as a member of this committee that I have a lot more faith and confidence in the operations of this county than I did when I first became a member of this committee. But that's not all you, Steve. It has to do with your staff and everything else. But it is one of those things where I think that, Steve, you're our budget officer, and that's your job, and we expect you to do it. And for myself, I would say, you know, I've been very happy with the way you and the county staff has responded to the change in the environment. And I think we're in good hands, so I appreciate that. Any other, we're kind of getting off in the weeds here, but Commissioner Bosevich, go ahead.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, what we're seeing is there are actually a lot of places we do a great job of breaking down silos. Public Safety Coordinating Council, Poverty and Homelessness Board, where we have these large groups that meet together, cross-jurisdictional, cross-departmental. I mean, Public Safety Coordinating Council involves just about every county department except for maybe Public Works and A&T. I think has representatives there, and they have subcommittees on behavioral health that tied to the Behavioral Health Summit. And it was actually their public safety repair plan that called for the new respite center and crisis center, mental health crisis center. That was born out of the public safety repair plan. You know, from the folks that's supposed to be, you know, jailing and arresting people and stuff like that. That's because people understand how that mental health issue was impacting the jail and taking up resources it shouldn't have. And then, a lot of those same people are at the Poverty and Homelessness Board and understanding how those services work. And that's been a change over time. I think the PSCC's grown more mature. I think the other organizations have, and there's going to be a lot of really interesting work that comes from that. As we look at restorative justice work in the community, and I think we have people coming to Lane County to see how we're doing things, constantly. We're one of the few counties that actually has done some randomized controlled testing of our justice programs. So we're doing some really great work, and I think we're going to continue to. And I think this discussion is great because I think we just need to, as we want to try and continue to do more of that work that's impactful, we have to have the resources to do it. And I think, my generalized discussion about where general fund goes to is part of just trying to protect resources. And is there a way to utilize some of our billable work, like our clinic work, and take more advantage of that to generate enough revenue to not only pay fully for that service, but maybe have extra that it might displace general fund, but that general fund might get utilized in a homeless program or a mental health program. It doesn't necessarily end up, going to the sheriff, but it's just how can we be strategic? And I think that's kind of what Steve was leading at with the budget messages. How can we look at some of these possible revenue centers, take full advantage of them, and make sure that we're, moving the money around in the right places. And then, part of that directing the money around in the right places are these really collaborative councils that bring in so many different voices, whether it's the Behavioral Health Summit, Poverty and Homelessness Board, or the Public Safety Coordinating Council. They're great sources of that innovative thinking. And we've done a great job, under Steve's leadership, taking advantage of a lot of that at the county level.
Commissioner.
Yeah, I think I meant to mention in my comments before, specifically call out the community justice and rehabilitation services. The creation of that is an example. If we're already insufficiently resourced to deliver the services, let's at least deliver the services in a more targeted way. And let's look at how we're allocating the resources to make sure we're getting the most for the resources. But that to me is and I think this sort of speaks to how it takes a while from when you identify a potential solution to actually making it happen, is because the context that we're operating in changes. Like the PSCC identifying a stabilization center being a top priority, it wasn't just invented there. It was part of a response to a nationwide movement toward more restorative justice models. And so we're constantly both looking inward to our own organization, our capacity and our resources, but also being responsive to the broader context that we're operating in. And that helps the community better understand the needs and what we're doing to address them, which then gives people a little more appetite to support and be part of the work and make our work more visible if it's more responsive to what people are seeing for themselves and hearing about on the news. So I think it's great.
Commissioner Bernie.
First, I totally agree with you, Tim. Second, and by the way, there's always going to be these new opportunities that we can access. I want to give you, for instance, I'm on the steering committee of NACO's Economic Development and Workforce Group. And we had presentations yesterday. I mean, this is a current example of all these dollars that are going through the Economic Development Administration and some other agencies for rebuilding America's competitiveness. And a lot of these dollars are specifically available to counties, so that as they're trying to develop more environmentally defensible manufacturing facilities and create more local supply chains, they don't have to do that on local taxpayer expense. So I firmly intend, I'm just using this as an example. I mean, as this occurs, I'm going to give it to these policy groups. We now have the ability to aggressively go after resource through this new department, right, that you've developed. And that's just yet another example. So we'll start seeing resources and integrating them in. But I also want to thank Jay, because I completely agree with the intent that was behind your bringing this up. And we absolutely do have to look at areas for cost recovery where we're not currently doing it.
Okay, we're at this point. Did you have something?
Well, it's something different that we've not really touched on, Steve. I'm going back to the ARPA collective impact slide that Robert Tindall put up, and it shows Lane County 74 million, City of Eugene 36 million, City of Springfield 14 million. And it's I just wanted to point something out that the integration and the coordination of services between jurisdictions is something that we're really achieving new heights of coordination. We still have a long way to go. That's one of the beauties of having somebody like Chris Pryor sitting in this room, because for a dozen or more years, you sat on the City of Eugene's budget committee, and now you're looking at the Lane County's budget committee and finding ways to use the $36 million that the City of Eugene's getting to boost, so that the sum of 36 and 74 isn't 140. It's it's whatever the 120, excuse me. It isn't, it really goes beyond that. That our pool resources give us more than the 1 + 1 = more than 2. You're doing more of that all the time. But really, as we look to the future, that's one of the things that we really can do better at all times, is coordinate what we're doing with the larger jurisdictions that we're working alongside. And Robert talked about the strings attached to federal dollars. And he also said that we are accountable. But we have to be accountable. But we have to be more than accountable for just what we're doing. But we have to be the weaver of the fabric to make sure that we're all accountable together. There's a lot of, this is one example, the ARPA money coming in, but other ways that the cities and the county spend money are more coordinated. So we get more than just the sum of the two parts. And there's nothing more to discuss about that, but we are doing a better job at all times, and everybody understands that we have to do a far better job in the future. So, once again, one of the reasons that it's so good having Chris Pryor here, because you can see what we're doing here in this room compared to what is happening down the hall in the City of Eugene budget rooms.
Well, I've been associated with organizations that were circling the drain. I have seen bad organizations, and fortunately, was able to help with a change of leadership that kept it from going out of business. So there's things that budgets do that make you suspicious, that make you go, this doesn't smell right. And if you've been around long enough, you begin to know when budgets smell bad. And this one doesn't smell bad. This one smells pretty good, actually. So I guess in a way that's a compliment. Your budget doesn't smell bad.
I wish I was there to smell it.
I've seen some pretty stinky budgets, and this one's.
I wish I was there to smell it.
You tested positive for COVID.
Yeah.
What the hell?
And you smell.
Yeah.
Get your sense of smell back, take a whiff of the budget. It's a light bulb.
Other elements the committee needs from staff that we should actually bring to our attention so that we can make informed decisions a week from today. Anything from the committee members?
May 17th is a deadline, right? That is when you need to have.
We're getting into the process.
I'll go my jets.
And that's a great segue. We will go ahead and move into process. Christine, you provided a handout.
Yes, I set a handout while we were on the break that you should have, and we're going to bring it up on the screen here too. So same process that you all saw last year. So unless there's any suggestions from the committee to change it, asking that if any committee members have actual proposals drafted up, that they be emailed to me by the end of next Tuesday. That gives us time to send it to staff, see if we need to get any information, and then put it all together and send it to you before the meeting so that you can see everything together. And then it's just kind of walking through the process of that evening, discussion on things brought to the table. You do have the ad for developmental disabilities where they mentioned the 15 FTE. So that is an ad request to the budget committee. So that is one that we know about. And then the discussion and the regular motions. So if there's any questions or
Any other questions for Christine about what she presented as process?
The 15 FTE was in DD's budget.
It is not, no,
But this was state funded.
correct, yes, this is where they have the state funding already, they need to spend it in order to generate more in the future, correct, yes.
So this is the process we've used in the past. Is there any comments or recommendations for modifying our process? You know, we've used this previously.
No recommendation for modifying. I'm gonna try my best to be somewhere where I have signal on the 19th. It's such an important meeting. And yet this has been planned for over a year. So I'll do my best.
Okay. And Commissioner Buck, you're going to be online, correct?
Yeah.
So we'll have you in attendance. Is there anybody else who's not going to be able to make the meeting on Thursday? Okay.
Just depends on my COVID test.
So I'll be, if I'm here, Chair, it'll be remote.
Absolutely. That will not be a problem. We can handle you remote. Christine's told me that we do have the same Zoom capabilities downstairs. So any other, so we're going to keep the process the same. We're going to meet next Thursday and the start time is 5. Is that correct? Or 5:30? 5:30, and it's downstairs in Harris Hall.
We will also have dinner. So we've done in the past.
One meeting.
The one meeting with food.
You haven't waited.
And the time that would be available up here?
We usually do about 4:30, 4:45 to give you time to eat before the meeting starts, so.
Okay. Commissioner Bosevich?
One last question.
Yep.
We always approve tax rates.
Yes,
Do you know, are they recommending the full amount for all the tax
everything
rates?
is the full amount, yes, yes,
Yeah, I just was just curious.
yes.
And I have questions about the TRT piece, but I can just ask. I'll just make sure before the meeting, I understand that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other topics for the committee? Bruce,
I just want
please.
to bring out, since last year was my first year and it was, online. This has been so, I don't even exponentially how much better it is to meet in person, which I know everybody knows. But again, coming from the private sector and really not being involved in the public, I mean, it's, I was talking with Jay about that. I mean, it's obviously totally different. And, but this is just, I mean, having the conversations with, it really gets you feel like, okay, I can understand some of this now. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, and I want to thank you, Bruce, because I don't know about other budget committee members, but Bruce has joined with me and once with Steve to educate our Springfield community about what the budget process is about, how it's organized, the departments and funds. So
You've done really good
you've
city
just
club,
done
yeah.
stellar, yeah, in terms of that, our educating about. And I just wanted to call that out, Chair.
Absolutely.
The one other thing, and we can talk about this next Thursday, but I'm asking Steve mostly, and Christine, is, we did make some changes to who we heard from. So we had a little bit of a truncated process, which I assume made it a little easier on staff. But just, how that was, and are we just assuming we're doing that again next year, or any changes to the process, whether that's something we'll talk about next Thursday, or if that's an interim conversation.
It is on the agenda, unless you wanted to bring up something now. I mean, we do have a moment here if you want them to bring forward any more information.
No, I mean, I can just say this again next Thursday, sort of for the record, but I thought it was great because it was just more focused. And so we just
I figured
spent
they'd
more
do a survey.
time talking about fewer things that we actually.
They'll do a survey.
And
no midnight meetings.
And we were involved and we did ask for, and staff brought back great recommendations. So.
I would,
Very good.
yeah, I would just say it's helpful when it's fresh. So
Mhm.
we send out surveys mid-year and we meet, but once this process ends and everyone goes off and they do, things, it's hard. So getting, your sentiments while it's fresh is helpful. I agree. I think this year has been really great. The staff have liked it. So staff have appreciated that we're kind of focused on the areas that it's a lot of work for staff to put together presentations and everything. So they've appreciated the focus. I have heard some of you say it's worked because we have an experienced committee. We don't have any new members of the committee. And that if we had new members, it might be a different dynamic. So that may be a consideration going forward. But but I think we feel like we've really appreciated it. So any feedback you can give us by next Thursday, estimates would be great.
Other items? Christine, nothing?
Just about the minutes again, which I think we touched on, but you will be getting email with minutes to review for approval next Thursday. So watch for those.
Excellent. Steve, any advice? Nothing.
Well, I mean.
You don't want to end this meeting. You don't want to end this meeting.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Adjourned.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chris.